Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to 27 of the greatest productivity hacks to optimize and automate your work. I am Justin. I am the VP of Marketing here at Capacity. And our mission at Capacity is to help teams do their best work. The purpose of this webinar is to help yourself do your best work. This is going to be a really informational, light, fun 35 to 45 minutes. Probably do 35 minutes of webinar. We'll leave 10 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll all be done. I really can't thank you enough for your time and taking time out of your day to come join us. So I want to make it worth your time. To be virtually zero sales or pitch or anything. I'll mention Capacity one time at the end, but the rest of this is about content. So when we think about Capacity, and we think about work flowing, we think about productivity, you're probably wondering, well, Justin, where do these 27 hacks come from? And they come from a variety of places. Over 20 years of marketing and marketing management. And during that time, asking almost every single person who I've either worked for, who's worked for me, I've worked with, what some of their best practices and tips are. I have taken a great interest in this personally and have spent a lot of time researching, reading blog posts, Twitter threads, YouTube videos, been on webinars such as this, as well as a guest, and really tried to soak a lot of this in. And then finally, after about a year, a little over a year of interviewing people for our podcast, I ask this question every single episode. What's the number one productivity hack or trick or tool that you've collected over your career that's really resonating with you? And I want to distill all of that down into about 35 minutes of just some quick hits. We'll share the slides and a recording afterwards. So again, I hope something in here resonates with you. And if I can make you even 1% more productive in your day, then I feel like I've done my job. So we're going to cover 7 different buckets here. The first one is going to be time management and timeless tips. Then we'll go into meetings specifically, which is in this virtual world, something that I think all of us are dealing with a lot more now than we were 2 years ago. And then we're going to learn how to decrease our distractions, specifically digital distractions. Then we're going to control the calendar, learn how to enhance email. It's probably my favorite section of the whole thing. General hacks for happiness, and then some all-around advice to close it up. So let's start with timeless tips. The first one is set goals for everything. Follow the SMART framework. And remember Parkinson's law. So the SMART framework, we all learned this in the very beginning of business school. Goals should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And Parkinson's law is an old adage that states that work basically expands to fill the time allotted, right? So put simply, the amount of work required adjusts to the time available for its completion. This is really valuable to think of when you're creating your goals and you're setting the time limits that you're going to use to achieve those goals. The whole package creates this measurable, visible, attainable framework that's right in front of you and should guide you in everything that you do. So set goals for everything. It's not just KPIs at the business level. It's also what you want to accomplish throughout your day. The next one is to break down tasks into component parts. Got the big picture of Legos here, the ultimate example of breaking down tasks and stepping on them in your kid's room and hurting your foot. But when you think about breaking tasks into components parts, really you're talking about mapping out the ideas. You're talking about taking a concept and thinking of all the different ways those various pieces fit together. And once you get all the pieces out in front of you, whether this is through an application like Miro or Lucidchart, or you've got a whiteboard, or you've got sticky notes, however you break it out. Once you have it all broken out, remember the Pareto principle, also known as the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of those components are going to be responsible for 80% of the outcome, and focus on those first, understand those. The next time management tip, and this is probably my single favorite thing in this entire webinar, the email section is my favorite. This is probably my individual favorite tip. And this is the Eisenhower Matrix. So we've all maybe heard of Dwight Eisenhower, at least I hope so, famous American general. He also had a very interesting way of managing what I'm sure was an insane and important schedule during those years. And basically the idea here is he would brain dump everything that he needed to do, And then he'd organize it in basically a 4-grid framework and think about importance of what it is that you're doing, and then the urgency of what you're doing. So something can be important and urgent, or it can be unimportant and unurgent. Well, the things that were important and urgent, you do those first. That's the thing you do as soon as you get done making this list, tackle those projects. The next bucket is stuff that's important, but not necessarily urgent. And in this case, schedule it, right? You can maybe do it tomorrow or later that day. Stuff that's urgent, but maybe not quite as important, delegate that either upstream, downstream, or cross stream, but maybe this is something that you can offload and leverage the people around you to help with. And then finally, if something's not urgent and not important, it really shouldn't be on your to-do list at all. This is one of my favorite ways to measure and manage my time. I built a Notion workbook for myself that I can organize my tasks in such a way, and then it spits out a priority list that I can crank through things. And it really, really helps to sort of follow this. And there's a reason it's so famous, because it's time honored and such a good framework. Next up is the Pomodoro Technique. So this is another classic, right? The general idea here is to take a task, set a time for it, and then leave yourself a little time for a break. This was developed in the late 1980s by a university student named Francesco Cirillo, and it's named after a tomato-shaped kitchen timer that they had in their office. So pick one project or task from your to-do list, set a timer for 25 minutes, and get to work. Work diligently until the buzzer sounds, and then when the time is up, mark it off, mark it as done, take a short break, maybe 5 minutes, and then repeat steps 2 to 5 for the next task. Now, what's great about this is that you will get a lot of work done in a 4 tomato sprint, so to speak, and then give yourself a longer break. So you're giving yourself over a course of 2 hours, 20 minutes and 5-minute breaks, but then also at the end, give yourself another 10, 15 minutes before you sort of start the next batch of them. Humans need to rest and recharge, even in smaller sort of bite-sized chunks like this, and give yourself that time to be successful. And you'll find that you do a couple things here. One, you give yourself a time-bound unit to complete the work, which we talked about earlier, but then you also give yourself that break and that rest. Set aside time for the bleh. So I've got my mise en place here, and the idea with the setting aside the time for the bleh is to just make sure the stuff that you don't like to do, you've got time set aside specifically for that. Let's use everyone's favorite example, which is email. We all hate email. For me, I've learned I should do it twice a day, right? I do it once right before lunch, and then I do it once right before I leave or close my laptop for the day. The goal here is to give yourself hard boundaries for the tasks you don't like, but you have to do. You've got a start time, you've got an end time. It's on the calendar, it's on the schedule. Your focus will be on that task at that time and not any other time. It's incredibly valuable, and I really recommend it for any email, expense reports, whatever your company's version of a TPS report is. That's the time for this kind of stuff. That's what I mean by the bleh. Now, going into meetings, everyone's favorite sort of fact and part of daily life in 2022. My first one is to never set a full hour or half hour. Set it for 25 minutes or 55 minutes. It prevents you from running around between meetings. And you also built in processing time for all the attendees, right? And really a 25-minute meeting is exactly as long as a Pomodoro. So taken in full, you're giving yourself time to rest. You're giving yourself time to context switch between whatever meeting you just finished and whatever potential meeting is next on your calendar, or whatever block of time you have next. And you're giving that same benefit to the people that attended. Speaking of attending a meeting and creating a meeting, always provide a meeting agenda up front. Here at Capacity, we will decline meetings if there's no agenda in them. It doesn't take too many extra steps to put an agenda in a meeting invite. And if you can't think of one, then there's a real good chance that that meeting shouldn't be happening, right? So the more detailed your agenda is, the better. People need details, people need context, and then also stick to the agenda. It's hard sometimes when you're meeting upwards to remind people, hey, this wasn't on the agenda, or let's focus, or whatever it is. But culturally, you should create a safe place so that people can do that in meetings. One of the great things about an agenda and being able to stick to it is that you give people that bandwidth to say, hey, can we take this offline? Or maybe you learn that a particular item might need another meeting, or it might need a one-on-one conversation with somebody. But if it's not on the agenda and it creeps into the agenda, what you've set for the original goals of that are obviously going to get spilled aside. So this is a really, really important one. So if a meeting doesn't have an agenda, don't be afraid to cancel the meeting or not attend. This next one comes from Jeff Bezos. I always thought this was really interesting. And he has a habit, reportedly, of making sure all reading materials, data, whatever it is sent out to all participants ahead of the meeting, right? And this is a good one for a lot of reasons. But for me, it's important to remember it does take a lot of effort on your part. And that effort is good because it drastically cuts down time wasted. Think about it from both your perspective as the meeting organizer and an attendee. There's an agenda. There are materials to review ahead of time. Everyone's going to come to that Zoom or come to that conference room or wherever it is, fully prepared with the exact expectations they need. Again, this isn't easy to do. It's very easy to let this slip. Personally, I am able to do this about 50% of the time. Very hard to do, but again, really worth it. And I would suggest at least giving it a shot. Now we talk about decreasing distractions, and specifically digital distractions. And we're going to start with the brute force method, right? So there's some great apps out there: Freedom, Cold Turkey Blocker, Focus Me, Rescue Time. There's a whole bunch of them. They all do more or less the same thing. So for example, you can tell one of these apps, do not allow facebook.com to load between the hours of 2 and 3:30, for example, or, don't let Discord load between 1:30 and 2, whatever it is. Keep yourself sort of narrowly focused on the task at hand. Timer clocks for meetings. This is another interesting distraction prevention technique. Our VP of product, Mike, he has a little timer clock called Timey the Timer that he'll bring to a meeting. And if the agenda says we're going to discuss XYZ for 15 minutes, we'll set Timey for 15 minutes. We will discuss whatever it is for 15 minutes. We can all see the timer. We all know of its existence. And as that's closing up, people are wrapping up the conversation, seeing what new loose ends need to be carried on in a future meeting, but then we're all ready to move to the next thing. And then finally, this is a bit of a cheap one, but it is true. The full screen button is your friend. A lot of us have a lot of different apps open at once. And once you go full screen, you literally cover all that stuff, and you're a racehorse with blinders on. Right now, all I have in front of me is the slides that we're looking at, right? I don't have anything else behind. There's email, calendar, Slack, all sorts of stuff open behind me, but all I see right now is the same thing that you guys see, and we're all focusing in on this together. System-wide do not disturb mode. This is one of those features of an OS that I don't think is used very often. I would love to get some data from Apple and Microsoft and Google on how often people actually use these things. But Mac or iOS has focus. Android has a similar technology. Windows has what they call quiet hours. Incredibly helpful. System-wide, turn all notifications off for a certain amount of time, or you can even customize them where certain apps have their notifications turned off, but if your spouse texts you or something, you'll get that notification, right? Extremely helpful. Highly recommend you dive into the settings of your computer and figure out how the way these things work. And I guarantee you it'll pay some dividends. Okay, messaging apps. We are a Slack company here at Capacity. So I'm going to give all these examples within the context of Slack. Microsoft Teams has basically all the same features, so it's more or less the same advice in both environments. But configure your team and channel alerts. So I have, for me, in all the channels I'm subscribed in, except for the one that is directly with my team, I've got the notifications paused unless certain keywords are used in the conversation or I'm mentioned directly. So for me, it would be things like MQL or website is down or the the word email or lead or new opportunity or whatever it is. That way, I only get something that makes its way to a notification if there's a reasonable chance it's something I'm interested in. The next one is to hide or unsubscribe inactive channels. It's very easy to, over the course of time, start getting a lot of bloat in the channels that you're subscribed to. There's nothing wrong with unsubscribing them. There's nothing wrong with deactivating them. There's nothing wrong with bouncing in and out of a channel as the sort of duty calls, right? This is something that I think a lot of people, at least in my experience, when someone shares their screen, I briefly see the way they keep their Slack manicured. Everyone's got a zillion channels they're subscribed to. I'm like, you don't really need to be a part of all those channels. Set and status. So right now, my status in Slack is the heads down, do not disturb. It's a little shush emoji and notifications are paused. Everyone that looks to Slack me right now is going to see that and they're going to hesitate. And the most I'll get maybe is, hey, Justin, I see that your head's down, but XYZ, feel free to grab me when you're done. You disincentivize the interruption and it really sort of opens up the amount of time you spend not chasing down notifications. Then we have work hours. So this is a really good one in general, because setting boundaries is important, especially in a world where work and home can potentially be the same place. I'm in my home office right now. And if I close my laptop or I leave the office at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, then Slack should shut down as well. I don't want to get notifications on the weekend when I'm taking my kids to their activities or whatever. Respect your time, set your boundaries, and both Slack and Teams have plenty of controls to do this. I highly recommend you do it. And then scheduling messages. So this is really good because if you're going to create all of these settings and all of these practices to prevent messages from coming to you unless they're important, you need to do the same courtesy on the way out. This is also helpful because if you're like me and you have a moment of insight or something finally clicks to you at 8:30 at night while you're cleaning up the kitchen or whatever, you can get it in Slack, schedule it to send to whoever you're sending it to for 9 a.m. the next morning. Then it's out of your head. It's off your to-do list, but it will be delivered to the people that matter at a time that's respectful to their boundaries. So again, scheduling messages, highly, highly, highly recommended. This next one is a personal hack of mine. I'm going to take credit for this one, although I'm sure I'm not the only one that does this, but I separate church and state, so to speak, with my personal and professional life inside of my computer. And I do this in a couple ways. One, I don't have the apps that I use for, my hobbies and stuff installed on my profile on this computer. It's on a separate one. This is great because now the distractions are somewhere else. So if you can literally like log out as work you, log in as everyday life you, take your break, schedule the kids' appointment, do whatever it is you need to do, come back out of that space and back into your work life. And you've got a nice separation there and you don't have the streams getting crossed. At the very least, different browser profiles. So Chrome and Edge, both you can sign in as different users. This is great because if you notice at the end of the day, when you have 1,000 tabs open, when you separate the sort of work from home, those 1,000 tabs might get, shrunk down to 400 or 500 tabs. And you're just keeping the distraction away. If the tab adjacent to the one you're on is Instagram, you're more likely to click on it and get distracted than if the tab adjacent to the one you're on is obviously related to the work you're doing, right? So at minimum, try different browser profiles. I use entirely different browsers. I have Safari for home and Chrome for work, and it really helps me. All right, controlling the calendar. So as humans, our most valuable resource is time. It's the only truly finite resource that matters most to us, and our calendar is the modern gateway into that resource, right? So anything we can do to control that calendar, the better. And let's talk about some of my favorite tips. So scheduling apps are your friends. If you're on Twitter, have noticed the discourse recently about Calendly. Calendly is not your enemy, right? What I like to do is create a 25-minute and a 55-minute link. And then I add snippets and templates inside of my apps. And then I also have a Siri shortcut inside of Mac OS and iOS that I tap a button and I can get either my 25-minute link or my 55-minute link. And then I can just paste that right into whatever email or message I'm writing. What's also really great about Calendly, and there's plenty of other apps. Calendly is sort of the canonical one, but in that 25-minute block, I can make sure people include an agenda. I can provide details on the Zoom or Google Hangout or whatever it is. I can ask custom questions. I've even heard of some people putting pay to meet links inside of their Calendly invites, so that if a salesperson, for example, wants to take a meeting with you, like they're literally gonna have to pay $1 to get the time. That might be a little extreme, but I think it all serves the same purpose of you've got a tool that really helps cut the back and forth and all the other things that happen with meetings. And it's a great tool to use. And I highly recommend everybody embrace it. It's not going away and it's not evil. Schedule your focus time. So focus time is so important. It's so valuable in what we do, right? The key here is there are apps and there are tools to help, right? So Clockwise is a great one. What Clockwise does is, let's say I have a recurring meeting with someone on my team. Clockwise will look at my calendar and their calendar, and it will say, hey, if I move this meeting from Thursday at 3 o'clock to Thursday at 4 o'clock, I'm going to create a 3-hour block of unscheduled time for both Justin and the person he's meeting with. And now I can, as a user, can use that time to build time in to deal with whatever I have at the day. And I don't have to constantly context switch between meetings, right? More helpful for recurring meetings with small groups than it is larger ones, but still worth checking out. There's also the idea of manually created focus blocks. So going back to making time for the bleh, put a block of time on the calendar, make it a recurring event so that everyone knows that, Tuesdays at 3 o'clock, you're focusing on XYZ, and it's there and it's sacred, it's in place, and it has to be disrupted for it to not be there, right? And that's the key with all this stuff. From a company-wide level, you can do things like focus time Friday or no meeting Mondays. There's different ways to do it. Here at Capacity, we make Friday meeting free, which is great because from the CEO all the way through the organization, we know that Fridays are heads down focus time. Love Focus Time Friday. It's if you ever want to have one of those suggestion box moments at an all hands or something, throw something in there for creating a Focus Time Friday at your company. Highly recommended. Right, instituting office hours. So again, this is similar to scheduled focus blocks, but a little different, I think worth covering. Pre-scheduled blocks of time for people to meet with you, and then batch meetings by type. So for example, all one-on-ones in a specific day of the week. What I like to do is have all my team one-on-ones on, say, Thursday in the morning before lunch. I like to do all my vendor meetings on Wednesdays after lunch. Keep these things closely knit so that as you're going through your day, you can have the ability to prevent the context switching that goes from, say, meeting with a vendor to meeting with a direct report to then having to go back to another meeting with a partner. Block them all together and try to keep yourself in the same train of thought over the course of multiple meetings. And then the ultimate sort of question, do we even really need to meet? There's a company out there called Otter.ai. They do transcriptions for meetings. Great little tool, cool company. They have a blog post I was reading the other day where it's one of those things where they took all sorts of different studies and surveys and did some of their own data and kind of made this big write-up about meetings. And there were 4 things in there that I thought were particularly interesting. So 15% of an organization's time is spent in meetings over a whole organization, 15%. And that's increased every year since 2008. The second stat I thought was nuts was that middle managers spend 35% of their time in meetings and upper management spends 50% of their time in meetings. So to know that there are people in the organization that literally half their day is a meeting begs the question, do we even need to have these meetings at all, right? And then the last bullet point that I think really drives it home for me anyway, was the average employee spends 4 hours a week preparing for status update meetings. So that just tells me status updates don't have to be meetings. Here at Capacity in the marketing function, we follow an agile sort of project management schedule. We try to align a sprint with our engineering product teams. And as part of an agile methodology, you have your daily stand-ups. Well, we do a in-person sort of stand-up on the very beginning of the week, and then everything is Slack updates from there on out, because I don't want me or my team like spending time preparing status updates for me. Just like, let's share the report, let's send each other a note, but let's not put status updates as meetings. Other thing, like, do you remember the phone? It's interesting that people say things like, well, most meetings could be a phone call, most phone calls could be a text message, but I don't think they actually do that. So one of the great things about a lot of the work management tools we have today, Slack, for example, has their huddle feature. Use that, pick up the phone and call someone. It's amazing how much quicker a fast conversation can get something taken care of than going through the rigmarole of finding a time where everyone can meet, creating an agenda, sending in all the details ahead of time. If it's something quick, just call somebody. It feels weird to remind people of this, but like 2022 and the way we do work these days as knowledge workers is very different than it used to be. And I think it's just important. Don't feel that you can't cancel a meeting. Most of them probably shouldn't exist anyway. All right, enhance your email. The bane of everyone's existence in the professional world is email. So let's talk about some ways to manage it. The first one is let some apps do it for you. So I got really into Superhuman a couple of years ago. And for those of you that are unaware, Superhuman is what I would call a ultra premium single user app. So it's not cheap. It's $30 a month, which is kind of insane for an email app, but they have optimized the process of consuming and sending emails to just the finest, sharpest point. And embracing the Superhuman way for 2 or 3 months that I kept my subscription really opened my eyes to a lot of best practices and ways to interact and use my email that I didn't necessarily understand before. But like I said, it's expensive. So there's other options. Spark is a good one that takes maybe 80% of what Superhuman did and offers it in maybe a slightly less slick, slightly less expensive, well, considerably less expensive package. But again, you'll notice that it's more about the methodology and the tactics than the applications, which means Gmail, Outlook, et cetera, can handle all this stuff too. And the idea here is just to create really good habits, right? Learn your keyboard shortcuts, be able to consume all your emails in sort of like a feed where once you send one or archive it, it's gone and you move on to the next. And you're able to just sort of get in a flow state and plow through all the emails. Basically, Superhuman is just a collection of Gmail views and keyboard shortcuts with some optimizations to make the loading experience faster, but you can get most of the way there, using Gmail and just some good practice. So that brings us to never save it for later. And this is a hard one. This is a really hard one because remember, you set aside time, you sat down, you have your app all configured, you got your shortcuts memorized, you've done all the things. Like, don't stop there, right? Process every email, even if the reply is, I'll get back to you at XXX date, right? The goal here is to leave nothing unfinished. So the response could be, thank you, so-and-so. I'll get to this on Thursday. Feel free to remind me on Friday if you don't hear from me. Send an archive. Now it's out of your inbox. Or maybe you get to the email and the answer is to forward it to somebody else because it falls into the delegate section of your Eisenhower Matrix, so to speak. And it's forwarded, it's sent and archived. It's out of your inbox. The goal is to get to inbox 0, which can be difficult, but it's something to work towards. So this is particularly valuable, I think, for marketers, but I think every function within a business can use this too. And that's just use a separate email. So I, as a marketer, sign up for all sorts of stuff. If someone in our market or competition has a webinar or have an ebook or whatever it is, I can't help myself. I sign up for things. Well, if I did that with justin.schmidt@capacity.com, I would end up with a lot of maybe unwanted email. So what I do is I've got a separate alias that I use on a separate domain, even in some instances, depending on how undercover I want to be. But it keeps my inbox pure, like the real quote unquote inbox, right? Related to this is the keyword modifier. So this is a good one for Gmail. So justin.schmidt plus webinars at capacity.com, for example. Google will automatically route that email into a folder specifically named whatever your keyword modifier is. This is good for a lot of reasons. One, if you sign up, let's say, for a bunch of newsletters, well, to manage that with normal filters and routing rules, you have to kind of say, if it comes from this or this or this or this and has this or this or this or this in the subject line, then mark as read and send to this folder. Well, if it's all going to the same address, you can just say anything sent to this address, mark as read and add to a folder. And then that way it's like archived in your sort of swipe file or research deck or whatever it is, but it's not getting to your actual inbox. The whole thing here is deflection in the first place, right? Another nice side effect for this, and this is good, especially in your sort of personal life, is that if you sign up for something and you use a keyword modifier, Justin plus Netflix at whatever.com, and then I start getting a bunch of spam to Justin plus Netflix, that tells me where the security leak or who sold my information or whatever it is, like where that occurred, right? So that's a good tip. And I'm pretty sure Outlook does this. If I'm wrong on that, forgive me, but I know Google does. And then the most controversial slide in this entire deck, sometimes you just have to clear your inbox and start over. Select all and archive. This is not something everybody can do, but trust me, it's not the end of the world. I'm not saying don't reply to the CEO, don't, forward the mission critical information off to whoever it is. But once you get past the majority of the important stuff in your inbox, it's time to just wipe the slate clean. This has actually come up a few times on the podcast, and I chuckle every time someone brings it up because I thought I was the only person that really embraced this, but it feels really good. I recommend everyone give it a shot every now and then. Okay, let's talk about hacks for happiness. As humans, if we're happy, we're more productive. If we're feeling good, we have more energy. So let's just round up a few of the things that I have found have been really valuable for me. These aren't quite the obvious, like exercise, right? Or eat better or sleep better, anything like that. These are a little different, but let's go through them. The first is to find or be a mentor. Join a professional community, make time to post. It feels really good to help people. I have developed some pretty good professional relationships with people that I'm either in a Slack group with or a Facebook group or a meetup or whatever it is. And sometimes those are mentors. Sometimes it's I take on the mentor role, and it just feels good to get help from people. And also, if these are people you can meet in person, don't discount a good conversation over coffee before your day starts, right? Probably once a month, I'll meet with somebody here in St. Louis that whose professional opinion I really value. And we'll go get coffee, maybe walk around and just have a good conversation. And you leave that meeting feeling that either A, you got some help, or B, you were able to give some help, or maybe both. Had a stimulating conversation that was related to, but maybe not exactly what you're working on or who you normally talk with. And you just have this extra energy to take into the rest of the day. It's a magical feeling to just share experience with people. And as we come out of the isolation and some of the distancing that we've experienced in the last 2 years, I think this is a good one to re-embrace. Okay, save yourself frustration. Got the lady who's steam coming out of her ears. This is a new one for me, and shout out to Jesse Pooji, who's the founder of a company called Ampush, buddy of mine. He's really active on Twitter, and he's got a great podcast called Business Breakdowns I would recommend checking out. But he has what he calls the 30-60 rule. And basically it says spend at least 30 minutes but no more than 60 minutes before asking for help. Use this to manage up and down. You'll be amazed at how much frustration you can save by either going just long enough to figure out the problem yourself or not letting yourself go overboard and never coming to a solution. Like, and if you do have to ask for help, if you spent at least 30 or 60 minutes on it, you're going to be better prepared to ask whoever it is that you're asking. They're going to have more detail. They're going to have more context. You'll be able to get to the solution quicker. I absolutely love this one. Next up is find your ice cream. And what find your ice cream really means is regular small pleasures have more impact than irregular large ones. Like, remember, consistency and joy and making joy consistent is what's important here. For me, my ice cream is playing guitar or hanging out with my kids for 20 minutes when they get home from school, but my day is not over yet. Whatever yours, this is why hobbies are so great, right? Whatever your joy is, whatever your ice cream is, like, make time for that on the regular. Speaking of my kids, this is one I learned from my kindergarten age daughter. And that's the I did it list. She brought one of these home one day and I just thought this was the greatest thing. But you create an I did it list, write down your meaningful accomplishments, and then hang it somewhere visible in the physical space around you. If you've got big life goals or, sort of medium weight, midterm, quarterly goals or whatever it is, write it down when you accomplish it and put it somewhere where you can see it. I've got right here, it's actually you can't see it because of the exposure, but it's a note my daughter wrote. And then on the inside of it, it says like, "Hi, Daddy, love you," or something like that. And on the inside of it is just a list of a few things I've gotten done recently that I'm really proud of. Feels great. If you feel great, you're going to work great, right? So create an I did it list. All right, let's wrap this up with the all around advice. The first one's make sure you're comfortable. Buy the ergonomic thingamajig, and if it doesn't work, try another. I've got a pillow on my chair here. And it's like the third or fourth chair that I've bought in this office over the years. Finally got one I like. I've got a earthing mat under my feet that my wife got me. We can have a separate webinar whether or not an earthing mat actually does anything, but I like having my feet on it. It makes me feel good. Also take a walk. As humans, we're meant to move. It's great for clearing your head. It's even better for meetings, especially meetings where you're meeting with just one person. If you can take a walk and talk with somebody, whether it's over the phone or in person, it's just such a great way to get ideas flowing. Next one is read as much as you can. And my background here is a little insane, but I think in the spirit of hacks and tips and tricks, we're going to break this down into much simpler pieces. So I really like apps that summarize things. Headway, these guys are cool. They take like self-help books and basically turn them into infographics. Really cool app. Recommend grabbing it, paying for like a week or a month of it or whatever. See how you like it. And you can obviously always uninstall it if you don't. But if you like learning things visually, this is a great way to sort of do that without having to, read through the whole 300-page book. And then there's Blinkist, who's the sort of originator of this concept. For those of us who are old enough to remember what Cliff Notes are, Blinkist basically is the modern version of that, where they'll take, the habits of highly effective people or something and distill it down into a 6-minute read. There's also an audiobook version of it. And the app is built in sort of like a thumb swipeable, consumable way. It's good for, commute on a public transit or downtime between meetings or waiting in a doctor's office or whatever. Love Blinkist, worth checking out. And then the final category here, and I picked Ray Dalio's Principles in Action as a shout out to, arguably one of the best sort of business books ever written. But what Dalio did was he took the 450 pages or however long Principles is, it's long, and he turned it into an app that every day has a separate principle and a little anecdote about it, sort of condensed into such a way where you can consume it in just a minute or two. He's not the only person to do this to this book. If you look, there's been a lot of big books turned into apps. Great way to consume the information, because honestly, at least for me, I like to read. And if I'm going to actually sit down and read, I would much rather read the latest novel in a series I really like, or something, a biography about a famous musician, or something outside of professional development, and keep my professional development to the sort of pithy, easy to consume mediums like this. Okay, use a good note-taking tool. I like this one. So don't just create a new text file every day. Like Evernote, Google Keep, Bear, Notion, Notability on the iPad. All these things are just fantastic. And they all have mobile and tablet apps too. So you can kind of have your notes available when and where you need it on whatever device. So you can quickly jot things down. They're searchable. I got a really cool Notion workbook that I'm very proud of this. I've got a Zapier integration that whenever I have a meeting, it generates a new Notion sheet for that meeting with the title, who is there, what the agenda was, then a space for me to jot down my notes. And it creates this searchable, indexable database of all my meeting notes that I now have available to me, which is extremely helpful as I move throughout whatever my task list is for that day. The next one is spend money on a good pen and paper. I don't know if anyone on here has ever gone to a stationery store, but go to a stationery store, pick up the expensive fountain pen, because in all these places you can try them out. Go find the really heavy weighted, crazy fibered paper and like try out the expensive stuff. The idea here is if your materials are special and sacred, then your notes will be special and sacred. And the space you create for yourself will be special and sacred, right? There is a real tactile human response to using quality materials and quality tools to do quality work. This is why, you can go out and spend thousands and thousands of dollars on, a guitar that, this is relating this to myself, that's perfectly tuned, balanced, sounds incredible, resonates just beautifully, and it just inspires you maybe 10% more. Is it functionally the same as something a tenth the price? Absolutely. But the sacred ritual of like, this is my nice pen, these are my nice papers, I'm not going to just chuck this around and get it lost. Like, I'm going to take care of this and remember what's in it. That puts you in the state of mind to really be intentional and to really think about what you're writing and understand what you wrote to go back to it later. I said I'd only talk about capacity once, and this is where it is. And the last one's to invest in software to help you do your best work. We here at Capacity have our motto, and our tagline is where work flows. Capacity is a support automation platform where we take all the component tools and products within a support stack, whether that's employee support or customer support. So things like knowledge base, help desk, workflow engines, ticketing systems, co-browsing, live chat, AI chatbots, all that stuff, wrapped it into one platform where you can sort of orchestrate and build exactly the process you need to automate for your support teams. We've had a lot of success with a lot of great brands across the spectrum. And, I'd highly recommend anybody who's interested to check out capacity.com. And with that, I thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me. I said I'd talk for 35 minutes. It's 43, went a little over, but that's not too terrible. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But otherwise, we'll wrap it up here. Where can you listen to your podcast? Thank you, whoever asked that. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever podcasts are sold. And it's called the Support Automation Show, by the way. What's something you think everyone should have automated? It's a good question. I really and truly think calendar apps like Calendly should be part of every organization's budget. I don't work for Calendly, obviously, but like, I just love the product. And think about every time you've emailed back and forth, like, oh, what about this time? What about that time? This makes it doable and usable, and ignore all the discourse on Twitter. Those apps aren't enemies. What's your favorite tip to help manage everyday work stress? Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, so for me, I'm a fidgeter. I've got an Xbox controller, a fidget cube, there's a Rubik's cube, there's this little ball maze, I've got my guitar back there. Like, keeping your body active in such a way is a really good outlet for some of that energy that, if left unchecked, can build into something that's much more stressful. All right, don't see any more Q&A. Again, Thank you everyone so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope one of these hacks and tips makes it into your daily practice. If you have any that we should add for the next time we do this webinar, please feel free to email me, justin.schmidt@capacity.com. Thank you so very much, and everyone have a wonderful day.